Kelly, and I'm here to talk to you guys about whether you should invest in Walmart or Target. Both of these guys are pretty large retail companies. They have thousands of stores. So if we go into a little bit more in depth about the stats on Walmart and Target, so Walmart has thousands of stores in both the U.S. and international. Target has 1,800, just over 1,800 stores in the U.S. They're both in all 50 states. A good way to see the massive difference in how large the companies are is that Walmart brings in this last fiscal year, they brought in over $5 billion in revenue, while Target brought in 71,800 million. So that shows you that Walmart is just quite significantly larger than Target. So when it comes to comparing their financials, we need to use ratios, because with those huge differences in numbers, there's no way you can accurately just compare them without using these ratios. So this is a table of ratios. It is for both the fiscal year ending in 2018 and the fiscal year ending in 2017. So our first ratio that we're going to look at is the return on assets. It's shown as percentage. Walmart's return on assets is 5.2%, while Target's is 7.5%. So Target's is quite a bit higher. Should know, looking at this one as well as looking at some of the other assets, it's going to come up a lot, is that in this past fiscal year, Walmart paid down quite a bit of debt. They even talked about it specifically in their annual report. So it's a good thing to look at, is knowing that going into it, because it decreased their income quite a bit. But overall, Target is doing more with fewer assets than Walmart is. They're creating more revenue and more income from that. So our next ratio is the return on equity. So like the return on assets, Target's is much higher than Walmart's, even more so than before. So Target's is at 13%, while Walmart's is at 25%. Walmart did talked a lot about that payment down debt and how that's affecting a lot of these ratios. But even if you go back to the year before, the year ending in 2017, where that wasn't as much of a problem for them, Walmart's return on equity was 17%. So it has gone down significantly because of that payment on debt. But even before that, at the 17%, Target last year was at 24%. So there's still a quite significant difference there. What this return on equity means is that Target's shareholders are seeing more of that money back. They're seeing more of that money back. So the next one ratio we'll look at is the asset turnover. So for asset turnover, it is the net sales divided by the total assets. So these are going to be much more even to what Walmart was here in previous years, because it doesn't take into account income, it takes in sales. So it's not taking into that account that loss of income due to paying down the debt. So Walmart's is at 2.4% compared to Target's 1.84%. So Walmart's is quite a bit higher on that return on assets. Their return on their inventory turnover is also higher. So that's our next one. Walmart is at 8.5% compared to Target's 5.91%. So that inventory turnover is quite high for Walmart. It's quite a bit above industry standards, because if you're looking at that, you might say that Target has a very low inventory turnover, but theirs is actually pretty average for most retail businesses. Walmart's is just significantly higher. Whatever they're doing, nobody else is quite doing it yet. So they're obviously doing something right when it comes to that inventory turnover. The next ratio is the debt to equity ratio. It's total liabilities divided by total equity. So Walmart's is at 9.7% to Target's 1.3%. This debt to equity ratio measures how much a company's borrowing is enhancing how much the returns are. So that's where that number is coming from and how it affects things. So the next two ratios we're going to talk about are the current and quick ratios. I think it's good to talk about them together, especially for retail businesses, because for retail businesses, they're quite lower than what is standard, what is the average. So most companies would want a 2-to-1 ratio, and you can see both Target and Walmart's are under 1-to-1. That is because of inventory. So for retail businesses, they typically have lower ratios for the current ratio as well as the quick ratio because of the inventory. So the quick ratio goes very low, and that's because it takes inventory out of the equation when it's talking about their assets. And for a retail business, the inventory is a large portion of the assets. And it's not quite as important for retail businesses to have those higher current and quick ratios because their inventory can be turned over much quicker than most businesses. They can liquidate a lot faster, and that's what those ratios are talking about. Moving on to our final ratio is the price to earnings ratio, and that is the share price divided by earnings per share. So Walmart's is at 32, while Target's is at 13. This number doesn't mean a lot without benchmark, and so the benchmark is usually between 20 and 25. So Target's is a little high, Walmart's is a little high, while Target's is a little bit low. So yeah, it's kind of, that number I found a little bit confusing because they were so different, but basically Walmart's is a little bit overpriced, while Target is possibly underpriced a little bit. Our next, just a quick review of all those ratios. I have put them all here again for you to take a look at, just because moving forward it's really good to look at those ratios when looking at who you want to invest in. And that's just that overview of the analysis, that Walmart had better assets and inventory turnovers, while Target had better returns on their assets and returns on equity. The other thing we need to look at is that cash flow statement. And this is important because without cash, companies cannot pay their bills. They can't pay their rent. They can't pay their employees. So when looking at the cash flow statement, I put the whole thing on here just because I think it's important to look at all of it. So on this cash flow statement, we see where Walmart paid out those debts. You see that subtracted in this cash flow statement. You see how it brought their income down 26% from last year. And then we have Target's cash flow statement, which is actually their income and their end cash is both up from last year. So kind of to sum everything up for cash flow is that Target is moving in, is like increasing the amount of cash they have, while Walmart is actually decreasing. So kind of a final analysis of who you should invest in is I lean towards Target after doing this research because they have a lot of upward movement in a lot of their numbers, while Target, even though they can explain away some of that downward movement through that payment of debt, if you look back farther into previous years, you see that there has been just a general downward movement, and it's not always because of that repayment of debt. Whereas Target had a small downturn from 2016 to 2017. By looking at their cash flow statement, I was able to figure out that's because they're spending more on investment actions and things. So that's spending more on property and opening new stores and the equipment needed for those and things like that. And those investments aren't really affecting as much their final cash flow. So they're actually bringing in more money because of those investments. So I after doing that, I believe that Target is the better option for investing in. Thank you. Back